welcome back to the channel. Today we're covering the Fitech. I made a previous video to this, which is pretty much just swapping a fuel-injected Foxbody or a fuel-injected small block Ford to a carbureted intake to use a Fitech. This is pretty much going to be the wiring and how I ran it and the way I chose to do it. So I'm going to go over everything, try to keep it short and simple. But pretty much the other night my buddy was over and we wired everything up. We had a few issues. I went back, looked at some wiring diagrams of the actual Foxbody or the car, the Mustang for this year, and figure out what I need to fix today. And then I should have another video following this with initial startup, initial settings, and all that, which is pretty simple, I believe. But who knows, we could run into some issues. These units have a lot of mixed reviews. A lot of people prefer the Holley Snipers. I got this for a really good deal at a swap meet, so I figured I'd run it. Although I do have to change my setup because this is not a power adder unit, so it can't handle boost. And I just picked up a supercharger, a Vortec, last week. So at some point in the future, we're going to be switching over to either a Sniper or getting a power adder unit instead. But for now, I need this car to be run in a couple weeks. 2 weeks actually. And I want to enjoy it this summer, so I figured this would be a nice setup. More tunability and all that. I previously had a microsquirt. It wasn't my style, I guess you could say. It wasn't for me, so I'm giving this a shot. So let's get into how we're going to install this and how we're going to run it on this particular car. Okay, first is fuel and fuel lines. Now in this car specifically, I did something different, and there are so many options you could choose for your personal car. For mine, I decided to leave the stock fuel lines all the way up for the Foxbodies. There's a quick disconnect down here on the passenger side of the lower block. So I did that, and then I picked up Russell blue fittings and I ran them to we have the return, and then we have the feed. So it's stock fuel lines just up to here. That's it. So it's like 3 feet of AN, or 3 feet of braided line with AN fittings. And then the fittings I used for this is an 8 AN, and I did -6 AN. So Russell's LMR sells the kit, but this one, the LMR kit, comes with the 8 for the high pressure side, and I went down to a 6 AN to match everything else because the Fitech, I believe, now I bought my unit used, but I believe they come stock with 6 AN fittings in the rear. So that's my front half of my fuel system. My rear half of my fuel system is going to be, I haven't done it yet, but it's Aeromotive 340 drop-in pump. So what I did, my battery's in the trunk here. I made a wiring harness, which is under the car somewhere, or under the carpet rather. So I made one lead to go to my battery. Now this is always plugged into the battery, always has constant power. This goes to the handheld controller, which keeps the unit, the memory safe and all that, because you have a micro SD card in the command controller, whatever it's called, to that. As for fuel pump, there's a nice wiring harness, and then it splits, and I ran where is it, this blue wire. Now I had cut it because I used a power probe to see where 12 volt signal was, and I tapped into the red wire. What I need to do after looking at some wire diagrams, because the red wire actually goes to the inertia switch and then puts 5 volts or the 12 volts back through the rest of the car. You need to tap into the PIC wire if you're doing it this way. So I made that mistake, so that's what I got to fix today. And you can see the other end of that harness just comes up here. So I did a little wire loom to keep it safe, ran it through the car. And then these are all just quick connections I did for now, just to make sure the unit works and I'm wiring it correctly after following the diagram. And then I bought a bunch of GM plugs, which should be coming into the mail today, just 2 plug connectors, so I can make everything plug in and unplug. So that's our fuel pump. That's our fuel scenario. Your fuel pump. So if you're using a Foxbody, I'll be pulling out all the harness and the EFI computer, which sends signal to the pump to work normally. So now the fuel pump will get power from the Fitech. So that's the fuel system. Okay, quickly, next we'll just cover the coolant system. So you have to make sure your Fitech, and it should come with the sensor, but I bought mine used, so it did not. So I just bought an adapter fitting, and then you could just buy a GM 2-wire sensor to replace it, and that should work just fine. So I have that in there, and then I just put the stock one back in this side to plug the hole for the time being. So that's that. Very simple for the coolant system. So next we will cover the timing. So the timing, or whatever you want to call it, the distributor and all that. I decided, actually my buddy had one on hand, a ready to run distributor. So it's really, it had a 3-wire plug on it. Let's see if I can pull it up. Had a 3-wire plug on it, and then it has a separate wire for the tach. So we're grounding out the positive and just sending power to the wire from the Fitech unit. So there's 2 harnesses. One has power for battery, which we ran all the way back, and then one has power for fuel pump, which we also ran all the way back. The second harness, and they're all labeled: tach, fan, key, and coil. I didn't use the coil. If you follow the installation manuals, there's multiple different setups depending if you have a ready to run distributor, an HEI distributor, if you want to use a CDI, or I think it's like an MSD6AL box. If you don't want to use one, there's like 6 different ways to do it. Find what's best for you and do it that way. I went with this because that's what my buddy had on hand. I didn't have to wait for a distributor to come in the mail, and it's simplest. So I had an MSD box. I decided to eliminate that. I may add it in the future and whatever, but I want to get this car on the road and driving. So then, yeah, so that being said, there's a wire for fan control. I already have a fan controller separate system for my electric fan. I did the Tor swap. It's in a really old video of mine. So I just decided to leave that alone for the time being. I don't need the unit to control the fan at the moment because my fan controller is working just fine. So next we have tach. Tach goes to your coil. And then negative. It goes to your coil negative. And then I have a key, so I tied it into tach for the time being just to give it constant power, or not the tach, the coil. The coil has a change in voltage sometimes, or voltage drops. So now, today, I bought to add a fuse, so I'm going to add that into the fuse panel that's right here on the driver's side. So it'll be a switched power fuse, and we'll be doing that. And then lastly, I think that covers just about everything. Lastly, just the O2 sensor. So I ran the O2 sensor. Now, when you buy a kit like this, it's mostly going on a carbureted car, so they didn't have O2 sensors. So it gives you like a add a plate thing where you drill in the exhaust and you add the plate with 2 hose clamps. That didn't come with my kit because it was used, and luckily this car has O2 sensor bungs in the exhaust already because it was an O2 system, OBD1, it had O2 sensors. So for that I have my AFR gauge on one side. I have an AEM separate AFR gauge, which doesn't really matter now because the Fitech has a built-in AFR gauge. So I put those in the stock bone locations. Hopefully they're at the right degree that they need to be at and at the right period behind the exhaust. If they're not and I have issues running, I will modify those and plug the bungs and do the add a bung. So that's just whatever, letting you guys know. Lastly, there's also wires for the command center. So it's just 2 plugs back here, and then I just ran them through the firewall. Right now it just comes above the pedals. I got a bunch of junk in this car. It comes right here, 2 plugs into the top of it. That's it. Once everything's situated and the car runs, I'll rerun that wire so that it doesn't get stuck on the pedals or my feet or whatever. So that's pretty simple there. It's a pretty simple thing to do. It's just time consuming to wire everything up. And then there's vacuum. So I have a vacuum tree here, and then there's a bunch of ports in the back. I think there's 3 or 4 vacuum ports in the back. So I just plug them for the time being for the test run, test driving, or test fire, whatever you want to call it. So I just still need to do that. Right now all I have is brakes on my vacuum tree. I eliminated cruise control, I eliminated AC, and there's something else. Oh, like the smog setup on this, I eliminated that takes vacuum. So I no longer need, I could just, honestly I could run right from this to the brake booster, which I may just do. And then in the future I put the AC pump back on and got the correct AC belt for this car, and I may be adding that back. I will be, I just don't know when. And then I think that's pretty much it. It's a very simple system to set up. Oh, the throttle cable. So I went to the local auto parts store. They had one that was way too short, so I got to order one off Jegs or Summit. And then I ended up buying one of these carburetor spring returns. I don't know if I'll need that or not, because the spring setup on the Fitech, it may be strong enough where we don't need the return, but I just gotta figure it all out on this side, and that's it. So there's really not much to this. It is kind of overwhelming when you first start it, but once you figure out the way you're going to set up your distributor and go about that, and then once you figure out the way you're going to set up your fuel pump, because you can do external fuel pump, you can do a fuel command center that they offer. There's so many ways. You could run a returnless line system, so you don't have a return line. You can run a return line. It all depends on the setup you want to do, and you got to figure out what's best for you. I mean, other than that, it's pretty simple to figure out. It's just, like I said, time consuming. So I think that's going to be it for this video. Just a short, quick video. And then I'm going to follow up, if it is short, who knows. I'm going to follow this up with an initial settings video and try and get this car to fire. All I have to do is fix these 2 wiring issues that I had from the other night, and that's going to be it. So I appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll answer them as best I can. Again, this is my first time installing a Fitech unit, but I just wanted to put out my problems and the way I went about it, so that anybody else who's looking to install one on a small block Ford, or even a Foxbody for that matter, can take my mistakes or the route I use, and if it works for them, to apply it to you guys. So I appreciate you guys watching, and that's it. Stay tuned for more content, and then as always, like, comment, subscribe.